The child has nothing to do with the father's stupidities. Not to have a child for this reason is a sort of punishment. We would be punishing the child before it has the chance to show the same physical and mental behaviors that his father has shown. It is true that it would be difficult for him or her with a father like that. Was I hearing my own words? It seemed that I was philosophizing. My mother had listened to us children, but I wondered what her husband thought about all this. But a week later, I would have my answer as I descended the stairs. Avon was on the stairs that led to the living room. He was facing my mother when I walked by. I wanted to go to the family room, but given the look on his face, I decided to go to the kitchen instead. I walked slowly so that I could read both of their facial expressions. Avon's countenance was one of bitterness and distaste. My mother's was somewhere between sorrow and determination. She was silent. He spoke furiously. Didn't I tell you before getting married that I didn't want any children? His words possessed a deep negative intensity. I do recall my mother finally saying something, but I do not recall what it was. It was probably something to appease him. I was already in the kitchen and could not hear much. I was a little afraid that he might have hit her. I honestly do not know what I would have done if he had hit her. Fate did not let me decide this. After all, I was afraid he would use the gun in the master bedroom. I could still hear talking when I sat down and placed my food on the kitchen table. I listened furtively as I put my peanut butter and jelly on my bread. I closed the lid slowly, for the conversation was getting sort of philosophical in a way of speaking. If it's a boy, are you going to have an abortion? I don't know what I'm going to do yet, she answered conservatively. He knew how to make her feel guilty, for that was exactly what she wanted, a girl. Another week passed, and she told him that she was going to keep the baby even if it were a boy. Avon hated the idea of having a baby so much that we heard about it every morning when he drove SAV and I to Center High School at 7:15 a.m. He came up with all sorts of reasons why my mother should not have the baby. One particular morning was brutal. He talked the entire time as he drove. At her age, it's really dangerous for a woman to have a baby. The risk for having a handicapped baby is very high. He could be deformed, he could have deformed hands, feet, and even worse, he could be retarded, incapable of thinking. I knew that it was harder for a woman to have children in her 30s, but I thought it was still possible. I did not think that 36 years old was really that bad. And then again, I was not a doctor. I just wanted to go to school, not to hear him anymore. When I had the chance, I reported this particular conversation to my mother. If you want my opinion, I think there is something under all those excuses he made up for not having the baby. He doesn't want to be a father. Do you know what I mean? He is already a father, but not really. But now he is really going to be a father. He doesn't want to create, quote unquote, anything. That same day, after venting profusely, I went home after school. I thought I would be home alone for at least 4 hours. Unfortunately, I was out of luck because Avon left work early that day. I was feeling joyous and tranquil inside when the garage door opened. Oh shit, I heard myself say aloud. I wanted to run upstairs to work on my homework in my room. However, by the time I gathered my things and was about to go upstairs, he had already entered the house. It was too late. He said hello to me, took the newspaper on the kitchen table, and began reading as he stood up. A few seconds later, he put the newspaper on the table and spoke as he made his peanut butter and jelly sandwich with his protein powder milk. I told your mother that it is not a good idea to have the baby, but she's not listening to me. She's very stubborn. I showed a sympathetic face so that he would finish complaining so that I would be in peace, but it didn't seem to work. He knew very well that I needed to do my homework, but he did not seem to care. After an hour and a half, I was dying of fatigue. I should have stayed at school to do homework, only if I had known he was going to come home early. After a few months, my stepfather stopped complaining about his desire for my mother to have an abortion, for it was too late. Talk of divorce was the next element of our dysfunctional family household. My mother showered us with joy each time she spoke about getting it. It was something they kept talking about. They talked about it whenever they fought or had a big argument. Meanwhile, they also made plans to build a bigger house near the Folsom area. Each time, the divorce would be canceled. My mother and I had a conversation the second to the last time they were supposedly going to get divorced. My mother and I were in the laundry room, which was to the left of the garage door. She was 7 months pregnant. "I have something to tell you," she said. I already knew that she was going to cancel the divorce again, but I answered anyway. "Okay. Avon and I are not going to get a divorce anymore." "You're not?" I said in disappointment. I could tell that she was not pleased with my answer. "Don't you know that it is difficult to raise 3 kids all alone? I'm 7 months pregnant." Despite her decision to remain married to him, fate had its own path. There are moments in existence in the universe that compel souls to look beyond fear and to render decisions that are not based on financial stability, mortgage payments, pain, death, or above all, fear of the unknown. Such decisions are always, in some shape or form, based on pure love, a love that is stronger than the superficiality of stability of physical things or negative energy. My mother made a decision that was not based on financial stability or fear, and I was deeply proud of her. A few days later, my stepfather was out of the house. He moved into an apartment nearby. One afternoon after my summer school Algebra 2 class ended for the day, I asked her why he moved out. She was near the laundry room and was sad and disappointed. He gave me an ultimatum. He said he wanted SAV to be put in a juvenile house for teenage delinquents. He said that he wanted you 3 to grow up to be responsible citizens. "Really?" I asked as a matter of fact in AV. SAV was not a delinquent. Yes, he challenged Avon only because he had physically abused us for years and years. He did not do drugs or stole from anyone. "How was he planning to do this?" I asked. "I don't know. He could not put him in juvenile detention center without lying about SAV's moral character. At the time, I thought that it was because SAV had refused to say hello to him when he saw him. However, I realized later that Avon was upset at him because he felt he was responsible for my mother's final decision to separate and divorce him. In hindsight, I think my stepfather thought that my mother had no choice because she had 3 children and was pregnant with another. In his logic, she had nowhere else to turn. He therefore mistakenly assumed that she would never divorce him and he could do whatever he wanted. "How could I?" my mother said with strain in her face. "I could not. He's my son. He hasn't done anything," she said, referring to SAV. "He said it was either SAV or him. I told him that I couldn't and he said he would leave." She uttered the words with heaviness and pain. "I see," I said. There was in that answer of mine comprehension. Faced with love and fear, she chose love. Years later, when I was in college, my mother would tell me that she tried to have SAV stay with several of her close friends temporarily. These people were aware of what was happening in our household. None of them helped. About a week after leaving the house, Avon made a final futile attempt to keep the family together. He had private conversations with each of us. SAV was the first person to whom he talked. He drove him somewhere while Messiah and I waited at the house for our turns. When he returned, he spoke with Messiah. Then he called me into his room. I sat on the left foot of the bed while he sat at the other end. He explained to me that he wanted to make things better. He asked me if I could forgive him for the past. It was a vague question. I did not understand how a person could ask for forgiveness for something so vague, something he could not admit. I was not comfortable with this, so I pressed him for clarification. "For beating us all these years?" "Yes." "Are you sorry for what you did?" "I'm sorry for what happened." He was dodging the question. "So you regret beating us all these years?" He sat there, quiet, and was looking at me gravely and calmly. He had some nerves. He wanted to be forgiven, yet he could not admit he was wrong. "If you can't admit that you were wrong, then I can't forgive you." I didn't quite know what to tell him. "Maybe one day, when you recognize what you've done, then I can reconsider." For me, the issue was straightforward. You did something wrong. You recognized and apologized for it. And that was the end of the story. I have always done this when I sincerely felt I have erred. The inability to do this was serious. Unfortunately, I did not understand this before it was too late. I should have accepted Ivan simply as he was. This I would deeply regret. After the conversation, Ivan went to his apartment, I think. In any case, we were home alone. I called Rance to relate the conversation to him. He told me that I did well. Afterwards, I went to talk to SAV to find out what he told Ivan. So, what did you tell him? I didn't tell him anything. I only said that I will never forgive him. He was not happy, but he deserved it. Did he say he was sorry for beating us? He's not sorry, he said vehemently. I believed my brother. For me, this was another proof that Ivan did not like to be wrong. Nevertheless, I was also beginning to see the difference between our personalities. SAV was firm and not as forgiving as I was. He was also braver and more rebellious in terms of refusing abuse. That ultimate summer, he also completely refused to even look at Ivan when he passed him. I could only imagine what Ivan was thinking. I sensed a hint of danger for him. 2 months later, September 24, 1993, my mother began to feel contractions. She said it was time to go and wanted me to go with her. As she drove, she remarked how bright the moon was shining. It was nearly morning, 5 o'clock. She did not seem stressed or worried that her water might break as she drove. Instead, her mind was focused on the full moon. This is how it was when I had you in the morning, she said with a smile. About 35 minutes later, my mother successfully checked into the hospital. She was dressed in hospital attire. I stayed with her for a while, long enough for the nurse to moisturize her ballooned stomach. Her water must have broken at that time, for she was in pain. She breathed out deeply. There were periods of calm and periods of suffering. During one of those periods of calm, I took my leave. I knew what was coming. Blood. And a lot of it. I did not like blood and did not want to see it. Blood invoked in me an unimaginable terror and disgust. I reached the door's threshold. I was out. Good, I thought. Just as I was about to head to the waiting room, there was Ivan looking at me. He motioned for me to follow him. Darn it, I thought to myself. We were going back to the delivery room again. He went to my mother's bedside, the side where her left hand was. He rubbed and caressed her shoulders and hands softly and called her baby. Ivan knew what I was thinking. Stay and watch, he said. He was very serious. I found the whole thing bizarre. Why should I have stayed to watch my own mother give birth? If he had bothered to learn a little about my life before coming to America, he would have learned that I knew a lot about sex and women giving birth. No, he did not know that I used to care for rams who used to have sex in front of me. He also did not know that I had seen my aunt giving birth to my cousin Akukuma. Had he asked, I would have told him that I had not enjoyed seeing the pool of blood that Akukuma was born in the house. I stayed to see the blood again. This time, there was a lot less than I recalled in Kusuntu. I did not remember the exact details of that day, but I do recall being in the car all alone with my stepfather, who was being totally fake. Giving birth to a baby, to a human being, is wonderful, isn't it? He said. He asked. Yes, I answered mechanically. He dropped me off home and returned to the hospital. He and my mother rang the first doorbell about 2 hours later. I opened the door and my mother brought the baby inside. Akofa was born. She was honestly one of the most beautiful people I had ever seen. I wonder how someone like him could have produced such a beautiful creature. We spent the rest of the day getting accustomed to the baby. That is, Ivan had bought some speakers that he was testing. He put it in the baby's crib and was trying out the walkie-talkie in different places of the house. Everything seemed to be all right. Ivan came by every day to see Akofa, then returned to his apartment. This was the routine, so I did not assume that any life-changing event was going to occur on that day. I mean, after all, Avon would come to the house, say hello, and SAV would ignore him as he had been doing for months. It was nothing new, and so I thought. That particular evening, my mother had organized a birth celebration for Akofa. She invited all her African American friends. The house was packed with people. There were people in the dining room, the family room, as well as the stairways, conversing in many languages. I was in the kitchen, preparing more food for the guest. I had prepared some rice with stove-fried mixed vegetables and hot sauce, for I knew Africans love spicy food. Everyone was having a great time. One of the guests congratulated me on the food with, "I don't know what you put in the food, but it's really good. You have to give me the recipe. It's just something I threw together as I was cooking. I did not know how it was really going to turn out." "You made this?" another person said. "It's really good." I turned to the food I was cooking. Avon came to the kitchen to test out the walkie-talkie again. The baby was upstairs in their bedroom. He occupied himself with this as the guests mingled among themselves. He hardly exchanged any words with them. He took his leave again to go to another part of the house to test the walkie-talkie. People had begun leaving, and most of them had finished eating. SAV came down to help me with the dishes. He sang as he dried the plates with the hand towel. He was singing a Snoop Dogg rap song. I did not hear him use any foul language. However, my stepfather disapproved. He came into the kitchen, stopped by the refrigerator. "Stop singing that song," he ordered. SAV continued. Avon's face became very intense. He was enraged. His voice seemed to echo with rage. "You will do exactly what I tell you as long as you live in my house." "I'll sing what I want," SAV said, and continued wiping the dishes. Avon just stood there immobile. Anger and surprise dominated him. This time, his sense of authority was lost. He must have believed that SAV was challenging him. As such, he remained there in front of the refrigerator with his mouth agape in astonishment. He did not know what to say. Seconds would pass before he would leave. I would not see him again that Sunday night.